Hello everyone and welcome to another video. As you can tell from the title, this is one of my Ranger budget builds. So today we're gonna have a look at what you can achieve with just less than 500,000 seeds. The gear that I'm using today is very limited in refinements. That means my weapon is only legendary plus nothing, and my gear score is 1250, which means anybody can get this kind of gear at any point. We'll talk more about what kind of gear exactly I'm using at the end of the video. Now we're not going to go too much into the mechanics of how to run Halls of the Eclipse, but if you want a more in-depth guide about how to run it effectively, I'll leave the link to the video in the description below. Now just so you know, this is not a stacked team that we're running this dungeon with. The level 33 and level 34 mages we've never met before. As a matter of fact, this is the first time one of them has run this dungeon. And that brings us to the main reason why I wanted to make this video for you guys. Too many times I've seen people get kicked out of dungeons just because they're low level or just because it's their first time around. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't kick anyone ever from a dungeon. There are plenty of reasons to kick somebody out, but inexperience or low level is not one of them. So this video is meant to show you guys that you can still have a good run even if most of the people in the party are low level or they don't have the great gear score either. Most importantly though is that you need to understand that you don't need to spend millions of seeds on your gear just so you can run dungeons. Obviously, the better the gear, the smoother the experience. However, this budget ranger build will show you that you can compensate for low gear by just simply knowing the mechanics and preparing in advance. Now, as I mentioned before, I already know two of the people in our party, meaning that I knew beforehand that one of them would be a priest and one would be a mage. And that brings us to the importance of using party chats. The most enjoyable part of playing Bless Unleashed is being able to run dungeons with your friends or guildies. Having access to party chats and being able to actually speak to your friends helps greatly. So if you haven't joined the guild by now, you should. Now, as I mentioned before, this build has barely any defense, and that's primarily because none of my gear is really refined past legendary, but that's not necessarily a bad thing either. We can use the fact that this build has very little defense in order to use the Elixir of Thorns 3. This gives us 15% attack while reducing 20% of our defense. They're very cheap to make and very cheap to buy from the market also. I'm also using a panacea of blades just so we can get a bit more attack. That way we can compensate for the fact that this build has very low crit damage. So together the panacea and the elixir of thorns gives us 30% more attack power. Together with the priest circle and the buff from the shield of faith, it boosts our attack by over 50% of what we had initially. Top that off with the 30% damage increase from our mark, and the first boss should go down without any issues. As you can see, I've sped up this video so we can conserve some time and keep this as short as possible. I'm trying my best to stay in the priest circle to get the extra attack buff, but also keep an eye out for things that I have to dodge. Because I'm using the Ring of Whispering Serpent God together with my mark, I can still heal through some of the damage that I take, which in turn means that I don't have to dodge too many things and keep focused on the boss so I can do as much DPS as possible. Now the main reason why this fight went so smoothly is because we positioned the tornadoes at the right places, giving us plenty of time and room to squeeze through the waterfalls. I'm trying to reload as often as I can, especially before I'm using thundering arrows, just so I can get that extra bit of attack from my quiver. So, even though we had a few deaths, the kill went pretty smoothly, considering that most of us had under 1300 gear score. Now, one way to make yourself be more visible for the person that has the other icon above their heads is to simply stand still and jump. And as you can see, the person that has the blue flame sees me straight away and comes over so we can spawn the vortex. That's particularly useful if you play a small class like an Ipin. And one thing to keep in mind is that you want to stand still as much as possible if the other person sees you. If you both start running around and jumping all over the place, you won't ever get to spawn the vortex. We finish off the first boss in under 5 minutes, which is pretty decent considering our group. Next up are the kicker and the priest. This is where most people start to get panicked. But using the same principles that I show off in my guide about how to do Halls of the Eclipse, you can do this boss pretty much flawlessly. Again, staying in the circle as often as possible and using my reload just before using thundering arrows gives this build the edge that it needs to compensate for the fact that it doesn't have a lot of refinements. When the priest calls out for help, I make sure I run straight to the edge so I don't get wrecked by the kicker's attack. Afterwards, it's just more of the same, keep dodging and kill the priest. At this point, I hold off on killing the priest because I just noticed that someone was getting somebody else up. So we do finish off the priest in just over 3 minutes. Then we move to fight the kicker. Again, just stay calm and make sure you dodge his special attack while being mindful of his reflect shield. I'm using the same technique that I was explaining to you in my foolproof guide on how to do Halls of the Eclipse. At this point, if you do decide to pick somebody up, make sure you either use the Union Sentinel skill, or if you do it normally, just make sure the boss is not facing you because most of his attacks are forward facing arcs. We finish the kicker off in just under 6 minutes. Then we move on to kill the last boss of Hall of the Eclipse. Just like before, the main purpose of this build is to be able to do as much DPS as possible while only focusing on dodging the big hits. The small hits can be mitigated by using the Ring of Whispering Serpent God together with the Mark. That way you'll be able to heal yourself back up without actually needing a priest in your party. Having a priest, however, simply means that you can do even more damage because you don't have to focus too much on dodging things. Remember that it's very important to use reload often, particularly just before you use thundering arrows. That way you make efficient use of the 2.7% attack increase that your quiver gives you. Now, after a bumpy kill, we finish the last boss of the Hall of the Eclipse at just over 7 minutes, making this run last just under 30 minutes. Now let's have a look at the gear. As I said before, this is all under 500,000 seeds. Obviously that depends on which server you play on, but I'm sure we can all agree that this is a budget build for a ranger. Now, I'm using the Bow of Radiant Opportunity. It's only legendary plus nothing, and I'm making use of the colorful and the 2 green runes. This build will need 8 green runes in total. Next up is my offhand. I use the quiver of an old hero because it gives me 2.7 attack power for 5 seconds, and that's every time you use reload. That's why it's important to use reload as often as possible. Next up is the Area Inspector headdress. I use this simply because it gives me good crit rate. You could substitute this for the S-grade helmet because it gives defense but you sacrifice DPS. Next is the Wind Chaser tunic. I use this for the same reason why I use the helmet, simply because it gives me good crit hit rate. For pants, I'm gonna use the tracker slacks. These are literally free because you get tons of them from running boss runs, and it costs nothing to upgrade them to Mythic 5. For boots, I'm using the Boots of Vigilance because, again, they give me good crit hit rate. Now for gloves, I've decided to go with the Gloves of Concentrated Opportunity simply because they're the best in slot whatever you do. They give tons of attack and this particular pair is very good on green runes. Next up, I'm using the Shadow Sin shoulder guards. They're one of my favorite items because it helps not only yourself but everybody in your party. Now I know they're very difficult to acquire, but if you keep an eye out, you'll find a pair. The belt is an S-grade, but it has very little critical hit damage. I had to keep this within the budget. You can definitely find a much better roll on the belt though. I gave up my Necklace of the Dead for the Necklace of the Golden King because it's much more affordable, even though it only gives you half the critical hit rate. For rings, as I mentioned before, I'm using my favorite Ring of the Whispering Serpent God. As mentioned before, this simply helps you mitigate all the little hits that you take, giving you more time to stay on the boss and do DPS. As far as blessings go, I'm using Nightwind simply because I realized not everybody has Centurion's command unlocked. And that, guys, concludes our video for today. I hope that you've enjoyed the video. and that you'll have more leeway towards new players or unexperienced ones when you go into dungeons from now on. Thanks for watching and take care.